As the cameras on smartphones and tablets become more and more powerful, one of the bigger questions is there still a need for dedicated standalone camcorders? Hey guys, here are OS Reviews. Today we're taking you on a video first look / review of the Kodak PlaySport. This is the ZX3. This pocket camcorder is completely weatherproof, so you can actually submerge it in 10 feet or 3 meters of water for about 30 minutes and it will survive. So it's a pretty rugged camera that also shoots at 1080p HD resolution. With that being said, at $120, it's not the cheapest camera out there, especially again because a lot of smartphones already have those capabilities on board. In terms of images, it also isn't fantastic. It's a 5 megapixel shooter, which is decent, although the main emphasis here is going to be on video at 1080p. Taking a look at the hardware first of this particular camera, it's pretty nicely designed. If it was Samsung, they'd probably say something like design by nature, just because this camera has some interesting curves going on. It's very much like a pebble on the front, so it's very comfortable to hold in your hand, despite being crafted completely out of plastic and polycarbonate materials. The front actually feels a bit like a baby skin material that's being used. It's very coarse. It doesn't really attract too much dust, which is a positive thing, but it prevents you from slipping the camera out of your hands when you're holding it. The camera lens is directly on the very top. On the left-hand spine of the unit, you have access to a kind of door that hides the SD card slot that allows you to put in an SD card. There is no built-in memory. There's also the battery. Now the battery is one of the worst parts of this particular camera. Otherwise, the image quality and video quality is excellent, which we'll show you later on. But the battery life, we only got about an hour of usage, sometimes even less, maybe 40 minutes before it completely drained. So that's pretty short, especially compared to some smartphones and other camcorders out there. On the back though, you do have a tripod stand, which is a nice feature to have. What I also like about this particular camera, you'll find these rubber feet on all the sides of the camera, which means it can actually stand up and record video if you set it on a table in this portrait orientation or in the horizontal orientation, either way. So you can actually use it and set it down on whatever flat surface you have and directly start shooting, in addition to having that tripod stand. So it's a really nice feature that Kodak actually built in. On the other side, you have access to a HDMI port. This is a mini HDMI port and also a micro SD port for charging the product. You can also charge the battery by taking it out, and that's basically it. There's also a power on and off switch with an LED indicator. The front features a 2-inch display that does a decent job of showing off your images and your video, but you want to notice that it's extremely easy to kind of scratch, so a screen protector would be a very smart choice. Down below here you have access to the controls, which are nicely thought out. They are tactile and risen above the surface, but the 5-way D-pad is a little bit stiff, so you do need to press a little bit harder. There is a record key, a play key, there's also a delete key. This toggles you back and forth between images and video. There's also a settings key. This is just going back and forth between the menu, and pressing on the OK starts recording video or takes an image, and tapping on it again stops recording the video. So overall, there's a pretty nice design going on, another lanyard cord. I'm going to also show you briefly the contents that are included in the packaging. You get quite a lot for your money, which is nice. You have a Kodak travel charger, very small, plugs into any wall using the USB. There's also an adapter for the micro to full-size HDMI that's actually included, a nice freebie that's thrown in. There's also a built-in AV cable if you don't want to use the HD resolution. If you have a monitor that isn't HD yet, you can use that cable. There's also a micro USB cable for charging and syncing data. And finally, there's also a lanyard that's thrown in inside of the box. So taking a look at the actual menu UI next, I'm going to quickly power the camera on and take a look at that. So every time you do remove the camera, it's going to tell you to kind of reset the entire time and date information. On the very top of the unit, you also have access to the amount of life remaining for your SD card that's installed. Now the unit itself actually supports up to 64 gigabytes for SD cards, which is quite a lot of memory. With that being said, we have a 4 gig card that gets you about 40 minutes of video footage, so not bad, especially if you want to record in 720p, it can be a little bit longer. We also have the ability to toggle back and forth between different frame rates, so 60 frames per second, 30 frames per second, those can also be adjusted. So on the bottom right hand corner, there's access to the SD card logo and also a battery indication sensor. So pressing on the right side of the D-pad here, you have access to the menu where you can select from the different types of video you want to record at, either 1080 HD or 720p 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second. You can see how the timer is kind of changing there depending on what mode I'm selecting. And if I change to 1080p, you can see I get a little bit less in terms of the time. Also interestingly, if you get into 1080p, the field of vision for the camera also shrinks. So you can see how I'm a little bit closer to my subject now, although the viewing angle is still pretty nice. It's a pretty wide angle, but with that being said, if I go into something like HD 720p, I actually can get a little bit more into the shot. Things seem a little bit smaller, so the angle seems to be a little bit enhanced, which is kind of interesting. Simply tap on the center key to start recording video. You have an audible beep and you are ready to go. So it's very simple to use, just like on those flip cameras that were produced by Cisco a few years back. But of course, a downside here is you don't have a USB that's built directly into the unit for transferring out your stuff. You have to plug in that micro USB port or cable to start transferring out your stuff. The microphone on the unit is also extremely strong. It's one of the most impressive aspects of the Kodak ZX3. It's one of the most realistic sounding microphones we've ever tested on a built-in camcorder of this size. So for something that isn't a phone first, the sound is extremely clear, it's crisp, it's accurate, and very, very impressive. So if you go to a concert, if you go to a place where you want to record all your friends sharing a conversation at a party, you can actually hear everyone, which is very impressive, something we don't tend to see a lot, again, on something this size. Over here, you also have the ability to toggle back and forth between the video recording and also the camera. So if I wanted to tap, again, over here again, I can tap it back and forth between the camera settings to 5 megapixels for the camera. Now, if you do plan on using this as a camera, I will say that you don't have any more settings. So for example, you have 5 megapixels as a resolution. You can't go down to 3 megapixels, 1 megapixel, or anything like that. You're stuck at 5, which is a limitation, although you do have quite a few choices if you're recording video. Now, in terms of recording video and also capturing images, this is not a autofocus camera, so it's going to be fixed focus, which means it's going to work best if you're giving some landscape shots and you're not too close to the camera sensor. It does a good job. Generally, images are sharp, they're well saturated, and also very bright, and you'll certainly see those aspects when we play back a sample clip at 1080p later on in our review. With that being said, you can also see how macro shots later on are also a bit more limited, just because if you get too close to the camera sensor, things start to get a bit more fuzzy. Overall though, even in low light performance, we were relatively pleased with what we saw from this camera, but you do have to keep in mind that there is no LED flash, so it's not going to illuminate itself too well under darker environments. So taking a look at some other core functions on here, you can also delete images directly. I can press actually on the camera icon there to again toggle back and forth between images and also between our camcorder and also our video recorder. I can also tap over here for playing back whatever already captured. You can see it over here. I can play it just by tapping on the center. Also using the speaker is very simple. I can simply play back a clip. I can tune up the volume. The speaker is actually pretty good, so you can hear what you're recording directly on the unit. You don't even have to put it into a computer to hear that the microphone is excellent. And even if you're recording video, you can also use the up and down keys to zoom in and out. Having digital image stabilization, we were still pretty pleased when we tried to move the camera around. Shots were generally very smooth when we panned around from landscape modes to closer up shots. So in terms of performance, and if your hand kind of shakes, it still works pretty well. It doesn't really make you dizzy or anything if you play back the video. So I think that Kodak actually did a pretty good job in that department as well. So again, you can delete your video if I'm done with it and I don't want to see it again. I can also tap on settings over here to change the time, date information. Speaking of, the settings here is basically classic Kodak. We've seen this menu interface on all of their small pocket camcorders and also digital recorders of late. And you can see how the icon-based system is very intuitive and easy to navigate, although sometimes the icons you have to kind of get used to before you start realizing what they mean or correspond to. So we have time and date, we have TV out, contrast, we have access to the microphone settings, so you can kind of see how loud the microphone is. There's the water setting for waterproofing mode. There's also the kind of white balance that you can change sharpness, the SD card settings, and also information for the camera itself. As I showed you before, if you want to use this underwater, it definitely works. The sides are coated in rubber, so it's very easy to grip and to hold, so it's not going to kind of fall out of your hands even if it gets wet or into water. And also the ports are fully sealed off, as you saw, so they are weatherproof and no water pointers. Before we launch into a video sample, I will say that the overall performance is also pretty fast. Sometimes there's a bit of delay when you're going back and forth between menus, but it's not anything too bad. I think the processor still does a relatively good job. As far as heating is concerned, the device gets a little bit hot along the center over here, probably where the battery is located, so it's a bit of heat that gets accumulated, but it's not anything that's too crippling. I think that, again, the main concern here is that battery life could be better. It could be slightly longer. At the end of the day, I have to say that the Kodak ZX3 is an excellent pocket camcorder with great waterproof abilities. It has a great microphone, and image quality is also very sharp, with video quality being excellent with no drop frame rates or anything like that. It's super easy to use, and the fact that the manufacturer included a lot of different orientations you can set the camera on is also very, very smart. Material choice is top notch, and we love the design in general. There are a few downsides to this camera, like the fact that the battery is surprisingly small and also the screen is a bit easy to scratch. But with that being stated, we still think there are a few advantages to getting something like this as opposed to staying with the camera on your Android smartphone, for example. And this is because this particular model supports full-size SD cards as opposed to micro SD cards, which can be a bit more convenient when transferring out. And also there's a tripod stand on the bottom, which makes things a bit easier if you do plan on using it as a basic camcorder for recording video. It's splash-proof, it's inexpensive, it's nicely designed, and overall performs exactly as advertised. You can check out our full review on our website, but for now this has been our video review. Thank you for watching. This has been the Kodak PlaySport ZX3 Pocket Camcorder.